Hi, you're listening to Expat Radio. I'm Bill Anderson, and we're coming live from the Costa del Sol. My guest today is John Taylor, who owns and runs the Calahonda Language Centre. He's been here for many years now. Unfortunately, we had a little technical issue just right at the beginning of this interview when John was telling us about initially moving to Spain, to the north of Spain, and then he goes on just to talk a little bit about any differences between the north and the south.
But a
Okay,
quirk of fate, and I stayed.
right. And how does life vary from the north to the south, John? Did you find big sort of cultural and lifestyle differences?
The biggest difference, really, for me was I lived in the center of a quite a large city, so it was city life.
Right.
Com- that's one big difference to living in an urbanization on the Costa del Sol. Although Malaga is just down the road, which is a similar sized city to Zaragoza. Um, so it was totally different. And of course, up there, you were immersed in a Spanish life.
Yeah.
And it's very much a case of sink or swim when it comes to the language, which is great because you're forced to speak. Whereas down here on the coast, as we know, English is the international language for people, whatever the country they come from.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a little too easy to get by without learning the language.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, John. But just to reinforce what you said there, my wife was born in Madrid, and her family are from Andalusia. And but when she was 8, they moved to Australia, and just before she was 18, they moved back to Spain, back to Madrid. And well, there were two things. The first thing was that she had to get her Spanish language skills back up again because, they'd spoken Spanish at home, but, she was now a young adult and having to really get into the Spanish way of life. But the other thing that she missed was having people to speak English with in Madrid. And we're talking about the 1980s,
Uh-huh.
so it was very much as what you say that the opportunities to speak English were much less. Therefore, the need to learn Spanish was much greater. Yeah,
Of course. Yes, it would be.
yeah. So you moved down to the Costa del Sol, and when did you set up your school, John?
Not until 87.
Right.
I arrived here in 82, but it was 5 years later when I actually set up the language school. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And initially, what was your idea to teach English, or what was your idea of setting up the school?
It was very much to teach both languages, both
Okay.
English and Spanish.
Yeah.
English mainly to the local population, and Spanish to, of course, people from all over Europe.
Right. Yeah. So, how many students have you had in all these years, John? Can you
I,
can you
my
count
God,
them?
that's I should have kept the count. I
Yeah.
have absolutely no idea, but we're talking almost 35 years
Yeah.
since
I know. I know.
since we opened it, and I suppose thousands. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people who don't know the concentration, especially of Brits on this part of the coast is phenomenal, isn't it?
Well, it is, and yet I can give you my average number of Brits in per class.
Right.
It used to be a lot higher back in the late 80s, 90s. The percentage of Brits in each group was much higher than today. If I'd have five people, maybe three out of five would be Brits.
Right.
Maybe now on average, only one or two are Brits.
Really? Now, what do you think that's about? Is it about a slowing down of Brits coming down to the coast, or they just don't care? They feel they don't need the language, or
It's probably a mixture of different factors. A few maybe have gone home with Brexit,
yeah.
which I didn't really want to talk about, but
No, no, no. Let's avoid that one if we can, shall we?
and also newcomers arriving on the coast over the years. I mean, little did I imagine when I opened back in '87 that that later on, a few years down the line, I would have so many Russian students, and
Right.
not only Russians, but of course students from what are ex-Soviet states
Of
that are now
course.
independent countries.
Yes.
Um, Quite a lot, yes, quite a lot.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna ask some of the cheeky questions, John. At some point, we're going to talk about it. But you know, uh, Brits are not renowned, are they, for really learning and using foreign languages?
Not really, no, they're not. But again, I think there are a number of reasons for this.
Mm,
Brits are lucky in that the rest of the world studies English, or
right.
most of the world. It's they're very fortunate in that respect. At the same time, it makes people a little lazy.
Right.
And on the other hand, I personally believe there's a huge faults in the teaching of languages in the UK.
Yes.
I mean, this comes from the government, and there is not enough emphasis, not enough time spent. The kids don't start at a young enough age to
Right.
learn languages. When when I look at, I mean, my students come from all over Europe, and probably the opposite end of the scale would be the Belgians and the Dutch,
Right.
who generally, if a Dutchman or a Belgian walks in my office and wants to enroll to learn Spanish, it's invariably his fourth or fifth language.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas the average Brit who walks in the door probably did a little bit of French in school
Yeah.
or something, but has limited knowledge. And when I say limited knowledge, it does go back to when we're very small in school. All over Europe, all over Europe, in
Mm,
school, when they learn a foreign language, they understand, they're taught the terminology and know the makeup of language.
right.
And I can honestly say that 90% of English probably, you mentioned the word preposition or whatever, and it's, oh, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
think
sorry.
I think that's very true. I learned English grammar when I was 11 and I started studying Russian at school.
Mm,
And we had this rather fearsome Polish teacher, um, and he was. I'm sure it was an act, but he was disgusted at us because when he said, I will not start to teach you Russian until you know your own language, and he threw this pile of books at us, and they were English grammar books, and he says, "Don't come back into my class until you know this back to front." And it was verbs, prepositions, tenses, all of these things that we don't really get taught when we're studying even English. Yeah,
that's true. This is the big problem. He did a good job there by insisting you learn your own grammar first.
yeah,
I mean, to be honest, having been brought up in North Wales, we were not Welsh speaking at home,
right,
although many of my friends were. But we had, I think it's probably 10 years of compulsory Welsh classes from the age of 5 to the age of 15.
right.
I have to say, I've forgotten most of it now, which proves that if you don't use a language, you lose the language.
That's
But
very true. Yeah,
but having said that, that knowledge, studying that, and grammatically, Welsh is quite a complex language
yeah,
compared to Spanish. It's
yeah,
very complex, but that gives you a knowledge, a background for learning languages.
yeah. I don't know any Welsh, and I know probably about as much Gaelic, but I wonder if, not saying there are similarities in the language, but similarities in the complexity of learning these languages. Because
Sure.
I know a number of Gaelic speakers who, even if they're a year away from their islands, and most of them that I know live in the islands, they say when they go back, it's hard going getting back into the Gaelic again.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I imagine.
yeah.
It would be. It would be. It's difficult. But again, it gives people a grounding when it comes to learn another foreign language.
Sure. Yeah, and I also studied psychology, and I was because language was my kind of first area. Um, I became fascinated by the way that learning languages forces certain pathways in the brain. And they say, oh, once you've learned two languages, the third one or fourth one is much easier. And I think there's something about that we start to make connections in the brain, and once you've made that hurdle of getting becoming competent in your second language, following on with other languages does become, I'm not saying easy, because learning a language isn't easy, but it becomes a little bit more manageable, I think, doesn't it, John?
I agree entirely. Yes, yes. No, it's true. No language is easy as such. I agree there. But yes, it does become easier to manage. I mean, in recent years, I've been studying some Italian, which
Right.
of course is another Latin-based language. I, I chose to learn that because I just think it's a beautiful language.
Sure.
But of course, you can manage things. You can relate things in your mind and structures, and it's a lot easier.
Yeah. So, John, we were saying about Brits maybe, and we're talking about the Costa del Sol because I think Brits that may be listening to this in other countries around the world may
Hmm.
be in the kind of situation that you were talking about in Zaragoza, that, they need to have the language of the country they live in order just to even do their daily things. Um, but how much do you think necessity is the driver of learning a language, and how much does that lack of necessity just make people think, doesn't matter?
Oh, it's very true. Necessity is obviously a great incentive. If the desire, if the personal desire is there,
Mm,
I say to a lot of my students, a lot of my students, if you're not a linguist and you've not learned foreign languages before, don't think you can't do this. The personal desire and wish to speak the language and communicate with the local people, that gets people over the line at the end of the day. It might
right.
take longer than those who, and does take longer
Mm,
than those who already speak three or four languages, but we can all do it. We can
yeah,
all do it. Even age. People talk about, oh, I'm too old to start learning a language. No, absolutely never. And actually, for people who are getting on in age, it's a fantastic mental exercise
sure.
to keep that brain ticking over. Um, is wonderful. Keep the brain active
Yeah,
to, even if one doesn't pretend to go the whole way and become fluent, but to be able to get by, to communicate with the local people, which offers great satisfaction, really.
sure.
If people don't make any effort whatsoever, they're inevitably going to end up in something of a little ghetto
Uh,
and miss out on an awful lot in life, really.
but John, these are the very things that many Brits criticize immigrants into the UK for. Or they come here and they don't speak English. If they're in the UK, if they're in Britain, they should speak English. And then, certainly down here on the coast, I'm not saying it's the same all over Spain, but certainly down here on the coast, many come and do exactly that.
Too many, too many.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do see a difference in generations.
Okay.
Um, when I think back, um, each generation becomes more conscious of the value of languages. I
Right.
mean, talking of Brits here now, the younger Brits have a quite a different attitude to their parents and most certainly to their grandparents.
Right. In what sense is that, John? Is it just in their ability or the desire to?
More the desire and really the appreciation and understanding. Maybe when I go back to the grandparents, they were still thinking in times of the British Empire and everybody
Ah,
should speak English,
yes,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas as we go on, we recognize.
Oh, I've lost John just for the moment there. So Dave, let's just take a little break and then see if John can get reconnected. Okay? Oh, he's back. We'll take a break anyway, just for the moment.
You're listening to Expat Radio, your worldwide friend.
Welcome back. I'm Bill Anderson. That was very nice, Dave. I haven't heard that before. And we're coming live from the Costa del Sol. And my guest today is John Taylor. John, I was going to say you run. It is your centre, the Calahonda Language Centre, and we're talking about languages. And you know, we're being a bit heavy on the Brits here, John, aren't we? We're giving them a hard time.
Well, we're only generalizing, though, Bill.
I know.
And really, sometimes I really don't like generalizing, but it's possible to do so when it comes to this. I know plenty of Brits, English, who've come here, who fantastic, learned the
Sure.
language, very determined, very able,
Yeah.
and have become fluent.
Yeah.
Because the younger generation also, many, it is for work reasons that they learn the language.
Right.
So they have that necessity. And as I was saying before, it's a lot different from past generations.
Right.
The situation is improving.
It is. It is indeed. And you know, one of the comments you made earlier, which certainly resonated with me, John, was about interacting with the locals. You know, I live in the countryside, and well, I can see my neighbours from here, but they're not very close. They're about 200 meters away, the nearest neighbour, and they are an absolute delightful traditional Spanish family. This is the kind of weekend place that they go to. They live in the village in La Cala. And you know, when I met these people, I had this determination. I need to get my language skills up because I want to sit down and have a beer with these people or a glass of wine, and I want to talk to them. They're very much country people. I want to learn about the country from them. I want to learn about living in the countryside and without the language because they don't speak any English. It's what you miss out on, isn't it, John?
Absolutely. And you can miss out on so much. So much that's really the essence itself of life. Just sitting at a table, having a glass of wine and picking up whatever and chatting about it doesn't matter whether it's football, politics, anything. It's how you learn, how you discover the culture, everything about the people. And really, people who miss out on that are missing out on so much.
Yeah. And you know, there are lots of, well, there have been, the last 18 months has been a bit strange for everyone around the world, I think. But traditionally down here, there are lots of, I'm going to call them events for want of a better term, but celebrations of various things. You know, Romerias, all these things to do with the virgins, these events, I should say, before Dave goes in there, the events. But you know, people can go and be part of these events. I would say that the virgins are usually statues.
True, true, true.
But you know, you can go to these events, but if you can't speak the language, you can't really ask anyone. So what is this about, and where does it come from, and you know, actually understanding what it is they're celebrating and why they're celebrating it without the language could be very difficult, couldn't it, John?
True, so true. And there is so much tradition here, so much tradition, part of which is religious. And all these celebrations are fantastic events. There are so many through the year, apart from the local ferias. And again, people can go along, they can watch it, and it's all fantastic to watch. But as you say, if you can't ask questions, if you can't really participate
Yeah,
and chat to the locals, again, people miss out on an awful lot.
yeah. And in general, you know, I would like I wanted to find out about these things. Yeah, I could have asked somebody who's been here for 5 years, but actually getting it from the Spaniard who has been steeped in these traditions, you're going to get a very different, I think, perspective on these events and celebrations than a Brit who says, "Oh, well, they do this for this and this and this." It's a different perspective, isn't it? Getting it from the locals.
Totally, totally. And coming back to that, somebody who can communicate with them and ask these questions, the local people really do appreciate and respect when the foreigners have learned the language, at least to a reasonable amount, where they can inquire and ask
Sure.
what's going on, what's happening. That holds massive respect, and it changes the whole ball game.
Yeah, because I think it's part of the feeling of integrating, isn't it, in the community, rather than just
Exactly.
being, I'll use a word in inverted commas, a squatter in another country. You buy your house or you rent your house and you just live there and that's it. Having this kind of interaction is part of the integration process, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like I said, when you are living somewhere that is completely Spanish, you have no choice but to integrate. But it would be great to see more and more Brits integrating. But as I say, the youngsters are a lot more so integrating. And of course, what does often happen with the youngsters, they send their children to Spanish school.
Right. Yes.
Suddenly, mum and dad need the language themselves. They want to help their kids with the homework, etc. So the children often bring their parents into the world of integrating.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, um, I remember when I came out here, I decided a complete change, and I retrained as an English teacher, and but quite quickly I had people contacting me asking about English lessons, and then I don't know, I must have been a bit stupid because this had never dawned on me that the parents who wanted me to go and give their kids English lessons didn't speak English. So in order to even organize a time to go and see them and whatever, I had to get my Spanish level up to have these conversations with the parents. And I was maybe a bit silly, but it hadn't really dawned on me that that would also be necessary.
Sure. Yeah. And of course, the children can often act as interpreters then for their parents in situations where they're needing to understand something in English,
Yeah,
and the parents depend on the children.
yeah. Okay, John. So let me ask you a question. Someone comes into your academy. It doesn't matter what nationality they are, and they have zero Spanish. Where do you start with them? How do you get this process kicked off with them?
Literally, the first lesson is to learn the alphabet and to learn how to pronounce Spanish, which actually is relatively easy, as you know. It's a phonetic language,
Sure.
and it does not take long to teach somebody. You could dictate something to them and they can write it down. Spelling is relatively simple.
Yeah.
It's phonetic, and to get that pronunciation at the beginning, to be understood and to understand other people,
Hmm.
it's the kicking off point to
Yeah.
get the pronunciation correct, and it's really not difficult. Although down here in Andalusia, like we mentioned
Ah,
before,
ah.
with the accent the way it is, people do not pronounce everything. They often cut off the ends of words, and I don't encourage my students to do that. But of course, I have to make them aware of that is what the local people do
Yeah.
to be able to understand them.
Absolutely. And, I have worked very hard not to try to copy the way some of my Andalus friends or neighbors speak because I think when they do it, it sounds perfectly natural. When a foreigner does it, it sounds ridiculous, I think. and,
It can, yes.
and unless you get to a point where you are native, I had a friend in Scotland, Antonio, and the first time I met him was at an event, and he was talking, and I didn't know whether he was a Scotsman taking the piss out of a Spaniard or a Spaniard taking the piss out of a Scotsman. Because he had this incredible mixture of the thick Spanish accent with local Glasgow expressions, and it sounded so strange. So I kind of determined not to try to copy that and to try to you know keep a more sort of neutral Spanish rather than a sort of regional one.
Exactly. That's the best way to go. It is.
Yeah.
It's the best way to go. It's difficult for some people though who um, children, foreign family come here, and the children maybe even born here, let alone brought up here,
Mm.
who naturally fall into that accent. And it's even funny when they look distinctly foreign, blonde, Scandinavian, whatever, and they go to Madrid and the locals, Madrileños, think, how come this foreigner speaks in this
Uh,
Andalus accent?
yeah, we have some Chinese friends who grew up here, and you know, I said my wife is from Andalusia, and when he speaks to her in Spanish because he grew up, he went to school, public school, and everything, and she looks at him and says, you know, Wing Wong, you know, you're more Andaluz than los Andaluces, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so the first bit is getting used to the sounds of the language, which, as you say, for the kind of the Queen's English equivalent, the Castellano, is really not all that difficult, is it? It is fairly straightforward.
It is. It is. Like I say, being a phonetic language, it is a case of pronouncing everything that's there, unlike the locals, and moving on from the pronunciation. Yeah, in a way, the first few weeks, the first few lessons are the maybe in some ways the most tedious time, that you don't have a lot to converse with, but you learn a very important platform to the whole language, especially
Right.
people who've not studied a language where everything is either masculine or feminine,
Yeah.
and that everything ties in with that is a
Right.
very important basis to the language. So that comes next.
Yeah, and then you know this is not unique to Spanish, obviously. You know, well, I study Russian and German, and the genders for articles, obstacles, objects is very typical, and then people ask the question, why?
Yeah, I know. They do. They always ask why, but sometimes, sometimes there are answers to why, and sometimes it's a case of because it is. Just
Because it
accept
is.
it, and away we go.
Absolutely, John. And the other thing that I guess I've been conscious of myself, because I went to live in Germany when I was studying, and I felt this there, and when I came to Spain, it's the same. And it's the word embarrassment and fear of getting it wrong. Is that something you come across a lot, John?
Oh, an awful lot. Having said that, in my experience, the worst of all for sensing that embarrassment are the Spanish themselves.
Yeah,
I mean, massively. I have this all the time. Um, and it is such a shame. Even to the point, I remember once one extreme case of I needed a new teacher and to teach Spanish, and I
hmm,
interviewed one young lady who had all the diplomas, certificates, so prepared for this job. Her knowledge of English was phenomenal. She'd actually done English at university.
right.
Although she was going to speak Spanish, I wanted somebody who was fluent English. And we carried out the interview in Spanish. Excellent. And at the very end of the interview, in English, I said, okay, interview's over. Let's have a little chat in English. And this is somebody whose knowledge of English is probably greater than many English people.
Yeah,
And she was actually too embarrassed to say two words in
yeah,
English. And that is such a shame with all that knowledge. And it is throughout Spain, that sense of embarrassment holds people back. I was go have a couple of gin tonics and and loosen up and get rid of that
I I
sense of
I do find my Spanish improves incrementally with the number of gin and tonics I've had.
sure.
But it's about losing the fear, though, John, isn't it?
It is
It's
about
losing the
losing the fear,
fear.
absolutely. And it's a shame when people do have that fear. It,
Hmm.
it, it holds people back. And I encourage all my students just to go for it. You do
Yeah,
not have to be grammatically correct. If you're understood, that's a great step forward.
but that's what.
And if you say it wrong and you're corrected, say
But
thank you. To
that,
those who are correcting
yeah,
you, be
but
be grateful.
that's what language is about at the end of the day. And that language isn't about writing highbrow literature. Language is about communicating, isn't it?
Absolutely. Communicating, street level, shops, bars, restaurants. That's where we go out, supermarkets. That's where we go out and practice. And making mistakes doesn't matter. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
We learn from our mistakes.
But you know, John, you mentioned earlier on about the way perhaps languages have been taught traditionally in the UK, and there has been this thing. If you get it wrong, you get told off and you lose points. You know,
Yeah.
and I think people bring that with them. This fear of being told off, you got it wrong, and
Uh-huh.
I think, yeah, there's the embarrassment of, you know, I sound really strange speaking another language, but there's also the fear of being told off.
Which is a great shame. Is a great shame. Yeah. It is a case of one has to speak, just go for it, use the language as much as possible. And also, I encourage all the students to watch a bit of TV in Spanish, put the radio in Spanish in your car, so you're listening to it. The more contact with it, the better.
Mm,
The more you do start speaking, you're gaining confidence. Whoa! I just communicated there. I got my message across.
yeah, yeah. But I always did that for certainly teaching English for my Spanish students. I said exactly the same thing. You know, put on some English speaking radio, and we're very fortunate here to have a lot of options, well, including expat radio, but a lot of options for listening to English speaking radio for Spanish students, and newspapers, and yeah, you can go on and on and on, isn't it? There's lots of opportunities.
Absolutely. I mean, for a lot of Spanish here, it is fantastic because they have every opportunity going into into English restaurants or even shops.
Yeah.
They can go in and really practice their English. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and equally, you know, there are just as many, if not more, opportunities for people learning Spanish to do that, but we don't always make the most of these opportunities, I think.
True. True. It's always good, actually, when people are active, if they play some sport and they join a club where you have local people and you're mixed there. Any activities, it doesn't matter. It could be tennis club, golf club, people who do yoga or other Pilates, whatever kind of sport or activity. That is where, and then they need to use the language.
Yes,
If that teacher is carrying out the class or whatever in Spanish, fantastic.
sure. Yeah, and that is really it's about, I would just call exposure to the language, and you know, I always found it was easier to speak Spanish than always to understand what someone else was saying to me.
Especially in an Andalus accent.
Especially, especially. Well,
But that also depends how fast people speak. So often people, a local can say something at such a speed that it totally deceives the listener. The same words, the same sentence at a slower speed, and maybe they can catch it.
yeah, yeah, and you know, again, Spain is no different from any country. Some people speak very clearly, and some people don't. Some people mumble. Um, I had, I used to manage some summer camps for a Madrid company here along the coast, and I had a boss who was from Madrid, lived in Madrid, and after 13 years, I still couldn't understand him. It was incredible. And he phoned me up. We were just about to start, and he phoned me one day, and Vicky happened to be there, and I said, you know, just a moment, Louise. I want to pass you on to Vicky because I want to make sure that I've got the right message here. So I could see Vicky on the phone, and I could see her brow starting to furrow, and then her eyes open, and then all I heard was, Luis, in Spanish, obviously, Luis, I'm from Madrid, and I don't know a word you're saying. Will you please articulate what you're saying? So, you know, it is, some people speak in a way that's really quite hard to understand, but that's not a Spanish thing. That's universal.
It's universal, of course. Of
Yeah.
course it is, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you get people sort of getting used to the sounds of the language, John. What about the actual use and speaking of the language? Does that start from day one with them as well, or How do you tackle that?
Yes, it does. With basics, just the
Yeah,
basics, the greetings, the typical things you will use on an everyday basis. Greeting people,
yeah,
saying cheerio to people when you'll see them next. Of course. And then there are always things we all have to learn, which is more memory, but great practice of pronunciation, which of course are the numbers.
of
It's
course.
important. It's money, the
Yeah,
days of the week, the months of the year. That kind of vocabulary we all need to learn.
yeah, yeah. I was doing a lot of my Spanish learning while I was still in the UK, and I became a bit obsessive about it. But for me, to learn a language, you have to become a little bit obsessed with it. And I had cards that if I was sitting in traffic jam, I was flicking through these cards with numbers, with prepositions, with I don't know, all sorts of stuff, and looking at the car number plates and repeating the numbers in Spanish, and I think there has to be a little bit of obsession about learning it, doesn't there?
Ideally, yes, ideally. Those who get more obsessed with it, then the more they'll enjoy it,
Sure.
as well as getting the results sooner.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's having time, and of course, the ideal is if somebody is working with Spaniards and they're
Sure.
having to use it, even if it's not essential in the office, but they're listening to it in the office or wherever every day. Then yes, they're going to get there sooner.
Yeah, I kind of think of but when I'm thinking about listening to people speaking Spanish or any language for that matter, um, it for me it's a little bit like the old radio, where you had to tune the radio in to get the right thing, and I sometimes think about it's like doing that to your ear and your brain, so that eventually you've got the fine tuning in there, and what you're hearing all of a sudden makes sense. But you need to be exposed to it, don't you?
That's a very good way of putting it, Bill. Yes, it is. It is tuning in. It is tuning in, and sometimes I feel like this is like a hurdles race. 100-meter hurdles. People go along a stretch and think, "Yes, I'm getting this," and hit a hurdle. Okay,
Yeah,
jump over it and start running along again to the next bit until and they keep going along that 100 meters. And you've got to be determined. You've got to be enthusiastic. You've got to really want to do it, and you'll keep getting over that next hurdle and improving your Spanish
yeah.
or any language.
Any language, yeah. I mean, I think what we're talking about here applies to people in any country where English is not the first language. I don't think anything that you're saying is specifically about Spanish or Spain. It applies really across the world to learning another language. Um, there was something else that came to my mind, John. Okay, let me just ask you this. What do you think people's motivation is for learning Spanish? People that come to you, why do they want to learn Spanish?
It's for a mixture of reasons. Um, Ideally, it's because quite simply they've come to live in Spain. I mean, I think personally, if I went to live in any country, I could never imagine going to a country without making an effort to some
Yeah,
extent to speak the local language. I just couldn't imagine it. People coming here, yeah, maybe it is simply they've come to live, maybe they've come to retire. They do want to integrate. Um, the younger generation, like I say, with children,
yeah,
it could be because the children are in Spanish school too, so parents must do it.
right.
Lots of different reasons, but generally, people today, the younger generation, do wish to integrate.
Yeah, I've well, you obviously know. I'm a local councillor here in Mijas. I'm the token foreigner on the council, and so a lot of people know me, and if they've got a problem, they come to me. And one of the things that I've come across in I'm going to say in the last 18 months, and so you'll know that this is all COVID related, is that people's lives were kind of turned upside down a little bit, um, and the nice tidy little British colony that they lived in. all of a sudden was opened out into the Spanish world because he couldn't just live in this little colony. And I explain what I mean. You know, more police stops, for example, especially when there were restrictions on movement. Police were stopping vehicles. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Why are you going there? And all of a sudden, they've got a problem because this nice little British colony that they lived in is back there somewhere, and they're having to deal face to face with a police officer asking for an explanation of where they're going.
I know a number of people that happened to actually.
Yeah,
One or two ex-students of mine that I bumped into
yeah,
were so grateful for having learned the Spanish they'd learned when they were stopped and
yes,
asked where they were going, that they were able to explain that they were going to the supermarket and they were then going straight home
yeah,
to avoid that fine.
yes.
Yeah.
This certainly came up a lot, and I did make a comment. You know, well, maybe this is a little check for all of us to put some effort into learning the language. And some people were saying, yeah, Bill, you're absolutely right. And others were saying, why should we have this? And I'm
Yeah,
thinking, oh,
yeah.
come on, guys. This is not for anybody's benefit except your own. Um, Also, the other area that I know there have been a lot of problems in, that there were typically very good interpretation or translation services within the health centres. And of course, two things have happened. One is that in the hospitals, the translation service just wasn't possible. And the other thing is that there were no face to face or very few face to face visits with doctors. It was done over the phone. And yet again, people were complaining, my doctor doesn't speak English. And I think, well, why should she or why should he?
Exactly. This no, and actually, when you ask about motivations to come and learn the language, another motivation for many people is to be able to communicate with their doctors in hospitals,
Yeah,
etc. And because I know from people personally, it's been a bit of a potluck whether the doctor they're given is English speaking or not.
sure.
And again, why should they? But that is a great incentive. It's a great motivation to people, not only with the police situations, the local town hall, and of course in medical centres and hospitals. Yeah,
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, people can still get their café con leche and their cerveza without any problem. But when you have to really understand important things, you know, whether it's from your doctor or whether you're communicating something to the police, it all of a sudden, I think, just gives a little reality check to people, doesn't it?
it does. It does.
Yeah. So, do you see yourself doing this until you retire, John? Because teaching is actually very hard work. People think, oh, you just stand up there and talk. Well, actually, no, it's very hard work, isn't it?
Well, Bill, if you're actually suggesting I'm getting a little old for this, you're probably right.
Well,
Do you know?
it's just when you said you'd be doing this for nearly 40 years. I take my hat off to you, honestly, John.
If I be honest, I plan for this to be my final year, this academic year, with the idea of retiring. I could have retired already, but with the idea of retiring next summer, summer
Right.
22. So if
Yeah.
anybody out there would love to take over a well-established language center on the Costa del Sol, I'd love to see somebody take it over and keep it rolling another 35 years.
Yeah, yeah. But teaching is hard work though, John, isn't it? You know, I think people
It
who've
is.
never done
Yeah,
it think,
it's mentally very tiring. It
yeah,
is. Um, Great fun. Don't get me wrong. I love it.
yeah,
It's. I think all those people who thoroughly enjoy our work are very lucky. You get up, you go to work, and you enjoy it. The communication, dealing with a range of different nationalities, people from different cultures, is a fantastic thing, a fantastic way to spend your working life, if
yeah.
you like. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I still thoroughly enjoy it.
And I have to say, John, don't get big-headed here, but you know, when I posted that you were going to be coming on the show with me today, there were a lot of people spoke very highly of you, and spoke very highly of your patience.
Well, I do. Yeah, patience is a necessity. It's a vital ingredient, really. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
But even if you decide it's time to set the business aside, I can't imagine you just stopping, John. How do you just stop teaching after so many years?
It's true. I probably won't actually. I'll probably still do a handful of classes. I don't know, maybe. Um, Even these days, you can do classes on Skype. I've actually got students in Dubai and different places,
Right.
teaching people the Spanish in Dubai. That's the wonderful thing about the modern technology. And
And
I'll probably keep my hand in and do a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, has this happened because of all of what's happened worldwide with COVID, or was this something you were already dipping your toes into, John?
No, I was already doing this before.
Right.
Um, from some years ago. Although I must say, obviously during the lockdown and everything, it was fantastic to be able to do lessons, video lessons on Skype or whatever. One to ones are great. I do find Zoom with a group of people not so clever. It's much better
Yeah.
face to face.
Yeah. Yeah, for all the great things that technology has given us, there's no real substitute, is there, for actually being in the presence of people?
It's true. It is true. Yes. Personally, studying a little German, studying Italian, I much prefer to sit in front of a teacher than to try and do things online.
Yeah,
I admire the people who are able to learn online, but for me, I like the face to face. Yeah.
yeah. John, believe it or not, our time is almost up. If people want to find out more about you, what's the easiest way to do it? Via website or via Facebook, or what's the easiest thing for them?
Either really, Calahonda Language Center is on Facebook or the website.
Yeah. So I'll just say it very slowly. Calahonda is how it's spelled, although the Spanish don't pronounce the H. But Calahonda Language Centre, if you want to find out more about what John is doing. John, I found this very interesting, and I really appreciate you coming on with me today. And well, I hope you have, if this is your last academic year doing exactly what you're doing, I hope it's a good one for you. And I hope everything is kind to you, including the students.
Bill, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it's been great chatting about it.
It's been very nice, John, and we need to meet up for a beer sometime.
I'm sorry?
We need to meet up for a beer sometime.
Oh, only one? Okay.
And
or
a couple
two or
of
three.
and a couple of glasses of wine.
I look forward to it.
John, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to everyone who has been listening in. Calahonda Language Centre, either website or on Facebook, if you want to find more about John. I'm very grateful to you, John, for being here. Have a great weekend, everyone. And, get those language skills up. Take care. And we're going to go out with an old song from the Jackson 5, but I think it fits in with what you've been talking about today, John.
You're listening to Expat Radio, your